Alright, Justin, what did you hear in the Callaway racetrack in the blue Scion FRS?
Well, I heard it was ripping. It was just, and then boom.
So, today we are going to be describing what happened at the Callaway racetrack. Was it fun? And why do I have all these pieces sitting in front of me? Alright, so, first things first. On the track, we had gotten 3 laps in.
2.5, technically.
2.5 laps in. We were at the end of the third. And as I'm driving, I'm in first gear, and I hear a grinding noise coming from the transmission tunnel. And I shift to second, and it's the same grinding noise. As I'm pulling into the racetrack, I hear the motor just cut off. Now, what do we have sitting in front of us right now?
Well, we have the head from it, piston, valve, very messed up, valve stem, very messed up, and then simple little valve, a little bend to it, but it's not too bad.
Now, I do just have to go in and explain that this is not the piston from the FRS that we took out. The piston that was in the FRS is completely gone, if that has any foreshadowing. Now, real quick, just as a quick explanation of what happened, this is what a valve is supposed to look like. This is what you usually think when you see a bent valve. Is this even a valve anymore?
Identifies as one.
Now, what had happened is the piston moving in the chamber at around 8,000 RPM. The valve sitting up here, the intake port with the valve spring attached to it. Now, as it was opening on the intake side of things, the valve started to float a little bit, losing the pressure from the spring. Now, as it was sitting there, this is all happening instantaneously. The valve makes contact with the top of the piston. Now, with these being very fragile valves, the head broke clean off. And that is what this is. Now, Justin, what is wrong with that head? So why we have the cylinder head? You want to go through and explain it?
I don't like explaining shit.
Okay.
Words do not work together.
Why we have the cylinder head? Now, the entire motor is completely gone. That is a fact. The entire motor is completely gone. That is a fact. Now, whenever the head of the valve broke off of the stem and made contact with the piston, it didn't stop there, clearly, because we have multiple bent valves. Now, as you can see, I don't know if you can see it or not, but on the top of the piston, it has a lot of dents inside of it. The piston itself looked like a crumbled ball of gravel. There was multiple pieces. It is all over the oil pan, and the motor is completely trash. Now, that being said, the Fa20 is by no means a bad motor, in my personal opinion. Can it handle the rev? Absolutely. This is an issue that you can fix with things as simple as stiffer valve springs, or not revving at 8,000 RPMs for a constant extended period of time. Personally, I think that the Fa20 is one of the smartest motors that I've worked on. Now, I am by no means a trained technician, unlike Justin, who is a technician and was in the car. Now, that being said, there are some good things to know whenever you are, if this ever happens to you, there are some good things to know. The Fa20 is one of the easiest motors to work on, but if you were doing this by yourself in your driveway and your car is lowered, I don't recommend doing what I did, jacking up half the car so that way you can access the transmission bolts. Now, it doesn't quite fit. It does run into the radiator fan. I highly recommend taking out the radiator fan. if you are going to be removing the valves and you don't know how,
Or if you don't have the tool, of course, because who has money for that?
I have a hammer. I don't have the money for that, but I have the money for a hammer. Now, you put this on the top of the valve spring. Make sure it doesn't touch the stem of the valve. You're trying to separate it. Now, if it would go the first time.
The piston went.
There are these little C-clips that wrap around the top of the valve, if I can hold things correctly. They wrap around the top of the valve and hold everything in place with the pressure of the valve spring. Now, as you could assume, these valve springs are not very stiff. I can move this one with my fingers. That's not what I would consider a good valve spring. Me personally, I would not. But you will run into a few issues. Now, whenever the piston did hit, unfortunately I don't have it on hand, but it did crumble the spark plug. You do want to go through and you want to remove each individual spark plug to release the compression of the motor. And also check the condition of them. That can give you an overall insight of what all is going on inside the motor. Also, you can go through and you can check the engine, or if you're having the same issue as me, you can check the intake manifold, where you will find lots of oil residue and lots of metal shavings. Removing the engine, on the other hand, can be a bit of a process if you've never done it before. Now, there's lots of help out there if you don't know how. Unfortunately, I did not film me taking out the motor, and I'm not going to throw the motor back in just to show you how to get it out. There are 2 bolts on the bottom of the center cross member. The car is right there, that's why I keep looking over there. There are 2 bolts on the bottom of the center cross member that hold the engine up. You want to remove 2 of the radiator hoses and remove all of the transmission bolts on the outside of the bell housing. Now, once you get it there and you have it hoisted up on an engine lift, you can begin removing the motor. Now, you will still continue to run into some other issues, as I had explained earlier. The other issues that you could run into being the tilt of the radiator. Now, if you can get past the plugs and the fans and without damaging the radiator, unless you are replacing the radiator, it is... I personally have never worked on a Boxer before, and I did it in 6 hours. It is not a very difficult process. Now, tearing it apart, on the other hand...
Oh, everywhere. All that good stuff.
Have cat litter on hand. There's oil everywhere. And removing the timing cover has more bolts than I would like to admit. If you do not have an impact gun, this can be a very difficult process. That being said, once you do start to remove the head, there are a few things that you will run into. First things first, you take off the valve cover. After that, you have the cam carriers that sit on top of the motor. And then there is a secondary plate that goes under that goes in between the cam carriers and the head itself. And then you get to the head where it has multiple torque bits. Now, torque bits are not reusable, so I would recommend taking them out with an impact gun, unless that is not something you have the availability to do. If not, then you will be more than happy with a breaker bar. Anything else? And don't dump oil all over your garage.
Yeah, it's a pain, but at first we had no clue that the plate was even like a plate or like its job. We were confused, and then we're like, hey, how do we get to the head bolts? Oh, there's a plate there. Nice.
Immediately we started trying to remove the head after taking out the bolts that we thought were the head bolts. Why it wasn't budging is because there are almost no gaskets on this motor, except for the head gasket, which did not blow. It's mostly RTV. That's what I'm holding in my hands.
And some of those RTV places can be a pain. Luckily, they give you plenty of pry points. That's something I did really like about this engine and tearing it down.
But other than that, it is a very simple engine to work on, and one of the smartest motors that I've ever seen. There are actually 2 fuel injectors per cylinder on a 4-valve motor, which is, in my mind, a genius idea to deliver as much power out of a naturally aspirated boxer as possible. With the aluminum head, I've never experienced any sort of overheating problems, and they are a very power-capable motor. The Fa20D has a thicker cylinder wall than the Fa20. But they do blow if you do not replace the valve springs. Screw the recall. The recall does not matter. I did the recall on the valve springs, and I still blew the motor. It was a waste of a week. I didn't have my car for a week. I'm never taking it to a mechanic again. But until next time, where we will be taking a look at two very similar Miatas and figuring out what the difference is. I'm sure that you will be able to figure out the differences very, very quickly. And we will also be digging into the torque converter. Not actually taking one out, but explaining why a few things. But we'll wait till then. Till then, this is Happy Tire.
See you next time.